Hello, everybody. Today is the 27th of December, 2025, and we are gathered here today for the 212th session of Mindfulness for Beginners in English, conducted by Nisaranwane Forest Monastery. I would like to welcome Venerable Homagama Dhammakusala Thero for this session and everyone who's joining via Zoom, or anyone who may be watching later, or anyone joining live with our live stream as well. Our program will commence as usual with an in-session practice of mindfulness, guided by Bante, and then we will have the talk on today's topic. The topic this week is type of questions, and then we will move on to any reports that we have received. And finally, if we have time, we will move to some questions. So to begin today's in-session practice of mindfulness, I now invite Bante.
Thanks, Sonali. Hello, everyone. So let's begin our program with a mindful walking session today. And for this, you feel free to turn on video and join more actively. What are we going to do? We are going to select some space where we can walk without trouble. Then you start walking back and forth in the selected space. And while walking, we try to be mindful of our steps. We can feel certain parts of our feet is touching the ground. You can feel the weight distribution. You can feel how the legs are taking turns, taking weight of your body. So this way we try to stay mindful, stay aware of our steps. And time to time, naturally, we forget the steps and our mind goes to various other things. You might see surrounding sights, surrounding sounds you might hear, certain memories, future planning, thought processes come. But among these things, we can repetitively return our attention back to the steps. Time after time, we forget the steps, we get carried away, but you can catch it, you can realize it, and you can return your attention back to the steps. So that's what we are going to do. Let's join for the walk-in session. And when you hear the bell sound, you can return back to your seats. Okay, everyone. That's our time for the walk-in session. You can return to your seats. Sonali, you can take over.
Thank you, Bante. So next on the agenda is the talk on today's topic. The topic is type of questions. The topic quote says, let me read it out to you. It is not the answer that enlightens, but the question. So to start the talk on today's topic, I now invite Bante.
Okay, everyone. So this is a fresh topic that we are starting this week, and it's an interesting one. Let's take some time to discuss the idea behind this particular topic. Now, let's say usually we are interested in the answers. We would like to get answers for many things. That's the worldly nature. We keep asking questions, expecting other people to answer them, and our main focus is on the answers. It doesn't matter what the answer is, it doesn't matter whether the answer is correct. Usually we prefer getting an answer. That's how it is. We need an explanation for all this. We don't like to have open questions. We don't like to have doubts. So we expect answers for all the questions that we have. You can see that in the sciences. They always try to find answers. When you see the scientist searching for the universe, they're always trying to find answers in those experiments. They try to see with new techniques and try to figure out answers for the questions that they have. So that way the world is mainly focused on answers, and that's how we are. That's what we need. We need answers for our questions. We are like little children who keep asking questions, expecting answers for them. Right? So that way, that's the usual behavior. But when it comes to the practice, when it comes to the Dhamma, we simply try to focus our attention on the question. The question of existence, the question of self, or the question of suffering. Instead of focusing or getting answers right away, the whole focus is on the questions. They might be philosophical questions, they might be profound questions, so the answers are harder to come by. But the main focus is on the questions. If we can understand this question properly, if we can understand the background behind this question, then that helps. So instead of directly giving answers or going for answers, in the practice of Dhamma, we bring more awareness. We bring more focus on the question. Now, for example, let's say the question of self. The world is focused on finding answers for this. How this self is created. God created it. Right? So some answers are needed. It doesn't matter whether the answer is making any sense. It doesn't matter the answer is rational. You somehow need an answer. Right? So probably their answer is this whole thing is God created. That's what they say, that's their answer. I found this recent article or some essay on the self or creation of this self, and that very person was wondering how these modern people still believe that this is God created. Especially in these Western societies, people are having that belief. This whole thing is God created. So that person was wondering how these people, we are in this 21st century, and how they are still believing that this whole thing is God created. Right? So it doesn't matter what they believe. It doesn't matter whether that belief is true or not. What matters to them is to have answers. As long as they have an answer, they are fine. They don't like to keep unanswered questions. They don't like to keep open questions. In such one way or other, they would prefer some kind of an answer for the questions, doubts they have. But in our practice, in the teachings of Buddha, it's not the answers that we are mainly focused on. Instead, the very practice is to bring more awareness towards the question. Let's say even the question of self, instead of finding a straightforward answer to this, Buddha encourages us to bring more awareness towards the self, the very question that we are facing, or bring more awareness towards suffering, the very question that we are facing. So that way, time after time, the whole focus is brought back to the question. Right? That's what the whole practice is about. Focusing on the question instead of the answers. That's how it is encouraged. And there's a very nice story about a monk who was studying in the Buddha's time, and that very monk, he was focused on the answers. So one time, after many years of practice, many years of being a monk, he came to Buddha and he was saying that if you don't answer these questions for me, then I will leave this monastic order. So he kind of threatened Buddha, telling that he would leave if the Buddha didn't answer. But Buddha was simply asking this monk, telling that, Bhikkhu, did I tell you that I would answer these questions? Then this monk said, no, Bhante, you didn't tell me. Okay, then what is your logic? Why are you here trying to force answers from me? I never promised you that I would answer these questions. So what are you trying to achieve here? So he didn't fall. He didn't fall under the pressure of those questions. He simply said that I didn't promise to answer these questions for you. right? So there were many popular questions in the time, and many people were trying to find answers for them. Questions about the world, questions about the self, right? So these type of various questions were there in the time of Buddha, and they were many people or philosophers, they were trying to find various answers for them. So they came even to the Buddha and was trying to get answers out of him, right? So that way you can see, even in the Buddha's time, people or the society, they were more focused on the answers. But simply Buddha, he encouraged them to bring more awareness, focus towards the question, right? So that's the whole idea of this topic. You can see the flyer, you can see the quote that's there. It's a quote from somebody, I don't know the background of this quote, but anyway, the quote says, "It is not the answer that enlightens, but the question." Whole idea is to bring more focus, awareness towards the question instead of going after the answers, instead of seeking answers. So that's the very idea, right? So let's say the question of self. We can simply bring more awareness towards this question. That is our very mindful practice. When we develop mindfulness, you are encouraged to bring more awareness to the moment. You bring more awareness and you try to notice what is happening in the moment. That was the whole practice. And you can see when you start practicing, when you do few rounds of walking, sitting practice, then you get to realize that you are bringing more and more awareness towards it. You get to see how you become aware of your thought processes, how you become aware of the surrounding, how you become aware of your emotions. So that way, little by little, more awareness is developed. So even the question of self, instead of directly answering that this is a self that's created by God, or this is a self that's created by someone else, instead of directly giving such answers, we are encouraged to bring more awareness to the present moment. And we try to observe the self in the moment. And it's interesting for a practitioner to do that observation. Their minds usually more focused on the answers. They do the observation for a while, then they come up with many questions trying to get answers from someone else. They say, why these thoughts are happening like this? What is the reasoning behind this? Why these emotions are coming to me like this? What's the reasoning behind this? That way, they keep coming up with various answers. Sorry about that. Right? So instead of giving direct answers to the problems that they are facing or the observations. Instead, we encourage them to keep the observation. We encourage them to continue with the observation. That is the whole idea. So time after time, we are focused on the observation. That's what you called the noble experiment. Usually worldly experiments, they are focused on the conclusion, the answers. But in the noble experiment, we try to get rid of the conclusion. We have a method, we have an observation. Time after time, we execute the method and get the observation. That way, repetitively, we do that. Many people, especially the beginners, they want to get answers. They come with many questions. But if you listen to an interview, if you listen to how it is answered, most of the time, those questions are left aside. Those questions are left open. And the teacher usually encourages them to keep on practicing. Because if you try to answer questions for them, then it becomes a never-ending game. Today they have 2 questions, tomorrow they'll have 6 questions, right? So instead of focusing on answering their questions, usually the interviews, you are encouraged to continue your observation. Don't rush into conclusions yet. Simply continue with your observation, right? So that way, time after time, your attention is brought back to the breathing. Your attention is brought back to the steps. That way, you are encouraged to keep on observing this. That's why in our report writing, meditation reports, you can usually see more priority is given to the breathing or the steps. Repetitively, that's where the focus is brought back. You are encouraged to observe the details of that object. You are encouraged to observe the details of your steps. That way, time after time, the focus or the attention is brought towards the present moment or towards the object that we have selected. Right? So that way, instead of answering those thoughts, questions, doubts, the practitioners are encouraged to do the present moment observation. That's what we do. Even yesterday, I was having a discussion with certain newcomers, and they were asking various questions, trying to figure out how these things are happening. Someone was asking, why do I feel the thoughts and the sounds at the same moment? So that person was feeling 2 layers in the mind. The sounds are also there, the thoughts are also there, kind of like 2 layers. So he was asking, how does that happen? He was asking, why do I feel 2 layers, 2 things at once like this? Right? So various questions are there. They try to figure out various questions and need answers, right? But usually what we do is we simply encourage them to continue their practice. Keep on the observation. That's what we do. And when we do that, little by little, gradually, your attention is brought back to the question instead of the answer. We try to keep the questions open. We don't try to get rid of the questions by answering them. That's not the whole practice is about. Instead, our main idea is simply to keep these questions open and try to observe them, try to bring more awareness, focus to them. So that's why probably the quote says it is not the answer that enlightens, but the question. Question is more enlightening if you can figure out the background of that question. Answers are in a way blinds us. When you get answers, you are satisfied. Somebody answers you telling that this whole thing is God created, you are satisfied with it. You have faith in that God, and you expect him to protect you and be with you in the troubling times. Right? So that type of answers are not helping you. And this is not easy to answer. The whole question of life, the whole question of existence or self, it's not easy to answer. So in the practice of Buddhism, we are encouraged to bring more awareness, focus on the question, and that very process enlightens us. The question itself is enlightening than the answer, right? So that's the idea. And when we talk about this specific topic, Buddha's teaching, one of the teachings, discourses, he was explaining about 4 types of questions and how to respond to them. 4 types of questions and how to respond to those questions, right? And in that particular teaching, Buddha goes on to explain the 4 types of questions and how to respond to those particular questions, right? And the very first question or the category of questions is direct questions. These questions are direct questions and they deserve a straightforward answer. That's the Buddha's explanation. Direct questions are there and you can answer them straightforward manner. Those type of questions are identified as the type 1. Right? So if we take a worldly example for these type of questions, if somebody comes to you, shows you a tree and ask, what is this tree? So this person is asking about the type of the tree. What is this tree? Then you can simply answer saying it's a mango tree. Right? So that type of question, you can directly answer it. And when it comes to the practice, in the practice also there are certain questions that goes into this category. For example, the question, can form be considered as self? That's a straightforward question, direct question, and you can simply answer it as no. Can form be considered as self? You can simply answer it saying no. Right? So those are the type 1. Then Buddha goes on to explain the second type. The second type is identified as analytical questions. analytical questions. You can't directly answer them. Instead, you have to analyze and give a long answer to that question, right? Analytical questions. If you try to directly answer them saying yes, no, then it's not successful. It is not accurate. So Buddha says there are certain questions that are identified as analytical questions, and those questions should be answered in detail, explaining certain things and analyzing them, right? So that's the second type, analytical questions. And if we take a worldly example, if we take an example about Sri Lanka, this type of question, somebody comes to you and asks, why did the country got bankrupt? Right? So in order to answer that question, you might have to analyze it and give certain facts, figures, proving your point, right? So that type of question, if somebody come to you and ask, why did the country got bankrupt? Then it's not easy question to answer. You have to analyze and give in detail answer for that question, right? Even in the practice of Dhamma, those type of questions are there. For example, a particular monk comes to Buddha and asked, Bhante, no self is said. What is no self? Right? That's the question. No self is said. What is no self? So that's the question that monk is asking. Then instead of simply answering, Buddha goes on to explain or break it into 5 different categories. First, he explains about form and asked that monk whether the form can be considered as self. Then that particular monk said, no, Bhante. Then again, the Buddha goes on to explain about feeling. And after that explanation was asking, can the feeling be considered as self? No. That way, he goes on to break this question into 5 different categories: form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Right? And each and every one of those categories, he goes on to ask the question, can this category be considered as self? Then that particular monk had to answer no. Right? So that way, the whole analysis is done. 5 different categories are analyzed, and then comes into the conclusion that this existence is only a combination of these 5 aggregates. So the whole existence is considered as non-self, because those different categories individually, they don't represent an idea of self, right? So you can see, instead of directly giving an answer to that type of a question, you'll have to go into detail and explain different parts of it, and then only come to a conclusion. So those questions are considered as analytical questions. That is the second type. Then the third type is identified as counter question. So these type of questions, they need more clarification. So you have to present them with a counter question. You have to get clarification on the meaning and the intention of this question, right? So the category number 3, the third category, is a bit complicated. Those questions, you can't directly answer them. You have to go back to them with a counter question. Otherwise, you can simply stay silent, mute, not answering this particular question, right? You either ask a counter question or you simply don't answer it. So this third category, the counter questions, they are somewhat complicated. If you go and answer those questions, then you might get caught in your answer, right? Because when you answer a question, you accept the question. You accept the question as true, right? So simply by answering that question, in a way, you are accepting all the information or whatever that is said in the question, right? So you have to be careful with the third type of questions, the third category, which is named as counter question. Buddha says that these type of questions, you shouldn't directly answer them. Instead, you have to present them with a counter question that demands more explanation and the meaning behind this question, right? So for example, if we take a worldly example for this, let's say a husband is traveling with his wife on the streets probably, and suddenly wife turns to him and asks, is she more beautiful than me? Right? And if you try to answer that question, it doesn't matter you say yes or no, whatever, you are caught in that question, right? If you say no, then it's a bigger issue. If you say yes, if you say yes, it's a bigger issue. If you say no, still you are proving that you have looked. After only seeing the other woman, you can answer that, right? So it's a tricky question. It's a question that shouldn't be answered. Instead, you can present with a counter question or you can stay mute. So that's a good worldly example for such questions, right? And in this practice, sometimes in certain discourses, you can find such similar questions. For example, a particular monk named Vachagotha, he came to Buddha and he asked him a question. Is there a self? That's the question. Is there a self? Then Buddha remained silent on it. He didn't answer that particular question. Then again, Vachagotha, he goes on, is there no self? Again, the Buddha remained silent on that question. Then the Vachagotha, he got frustrated and he left. Venerable Ananda was nearby and he was asking, Bhante, why didn't you answer those questions? Then Buddha goes on to explain the whole background. He was saying, Ananda, these type of questions, you shouldn't answer them. Either you have to present them with a counter question, otherwise you can stay mute. That's how you have to tackle these type of questions. And Buddha goes on to explain, saying, if I answer the question, is there a self? then that very answer might lead them into the view of eternalism. Eternalism, a self existing throughout these different lives. Then again, Buddha goes on to explain, if I answer the question, is there no self? Then they might get into a view of nihilism. Right? So those type of views are there in this world. Some people might say that this is only life. There's no life after death. Right? So you can do whatever and live a happy life. You can earn in any means and get the money that you require. You don't have to stick to the social norms. You can enjoy the world as you wish, because this is the only life that's given to you. After death, there is nothing beyond. Right? So those type of views are there in this world. That's why people go on to enjoy life, thinking that this is the only chance I am given. So if you answer a question, is there no self? That type of a question, Buddha says, then that very answer might lead people into nihilism. So you can see different views are there. So if you answer a question like this, then that very answer might lead you into more trouble. So Buddha goes on to explain, saying that these type of questions are considered as counter question. You shouldn't answer them. Instead, you have to present them with a counter question, or you have to stay mute. That's the third type. Then the fourth type are the questions that should be set aside. You simply reject them, saying that your question is faulty, I'm not answering. Right? So this fourth type is identified as the questions that should be set aside. There's a flaw in the question, so you can't simply answer them, you simply reject those questions. Right? So those type of questions are harder to come by probably, but still such questions are there. Such questions are there, and we can see time to time even in the Buddhist teachings. For example, those 10 popular questions from the time. Buddha famously rejected all those 10 questions, saying that those questions are faulty and he is not answering them. Right? So those type of questions, for example, there was a question about the perfectly enlightened one. What happens to the perfectly enlightened one after his death? So that's one of the famous questions that was rejected by Buddha, saying, I am not going to answer these type of questions. If you answer them, then you are accepting all those assumptions that are in the question, right? So these fourth type of questions, they might be harder to come by, but still such questions are there. These questions are considered as the questions that should be set aside. You reject the question, you don't answer that question, right? So you can see it's not a simple question and answer game when it comes to practice. Instead, you have to bring more awareness to the question, and in the process, you get to figure out what type of a question this is. And that's why it's not the answers that enlightens. Instead, the question. That's what enlightens, right? So that way, we keep on bringing our attention to the question. Now, today we selected examples on the idea of self, right? All these questions are surrounding the idea of self. So you can see even Buddha, when he was teaching people, he was careful to answer these questions. He didn't simply answer each and every question that was presented to him. He didn't simply say that this is no self. Instead, he goes into a breakdown. He goes into each and every category and proves that each and every category isn't self. Right? But today's Buddhism, you can see many people, they are simply saying this is no self. They simply come and tell that. That's Buddhist teaching, that's they say. Right? That's how people try to simplify these things. But whenever you deal with the world, whenever you talk to other people, whenever you function, all you feel is a self. You can't deny that, right? You can feel a self within you. You can feel a self talking. You can feel a self experiencing pain. You can feel a self suffering or thinking thoughts, trying to find easy ways, right? So that way, whenever we are living our life, all we feel is a self. How can we simply go and say this is non-self? That's not the way to approach it. I remember one time a German lady, I think she was visiting Sri Lanka for like 2-3 weeks. And on the way to airport, she came here to Nisarana and I think stayed like couple of days. During that time, nobody else was there. So I had to go and talk with her for a while, encourage her to do the practice. So she started the discussion saying that Bante, I have been here probably like 3 weeks. I have traveled to many Buddhist temples, monasteries. I have met many teachers. I'm very devoted. I'm very faithful towards the Buddhist teachings. And now I understand that this is no self. That was her opening statement. Right? Then how to answer this? I told her that don't say like that. Don't just simply say that there's no self or you are experiencing no self. That's not how it is. Instead, all you experience is a self. Right? So what we do is, what is this self? Where is it hidden? Is the self there in my thoughts? You keep on observing. Time after time, you watch the thoughts to see whether there is a self hidden there. Is the self hidden behind my breath? Is the self hidden behind my emotions? Is the self hidden behind the pain that I am experiencing? Right? So that way, you don't simply declare that there is no self. Instead, you go and investigate, trying to find where this self is hidden. That's the very idea. So I told her better not to declare such statements. Instead, simply keep it open and continue with your noble experiment. Continue with your noble quest. That's the very idea. And she was telling that she was a high school teacher in Germany. And I gave her like this Sati Pasala guidebook for children. and there were 80 lessons. Sorry, there were 40 lessons. 8 weeks into 5 days. That's a guidebook for children, right? So 80 lessons were there. And I gave her this book and I told her that you better teach these lessons, these mindfulness lessons to your high school students. You can't simply go teach them saying that there is no self. They would argue, they would say that I am experiencing a self. So I told her, you better teach these lessons. You start with lesson number 1. You study it. You do it in this week. Then again, you study the lesson number 2. You do it next week, the week after, right? So that way you have to spend like 40 weeks studying these lessons yourself, practicing mindfulness on your own, then going and explaining these lessons to the children and practicing mindfulness along with them, right? So that type of course, if that person continues, if they continue for like 40 weeks, then towards the end of that course, you can really see probably that person also experience the true nature of this existence, of this self. So I told her, you finish these 40 lessons and you will be an arahant. That's what I said. And she had a good laugh and said, Bante, thank you for the joke. Although it feels like a joke, it is not really a joke. The whole idea is this process. You have to continue through this process. That's how the practice will mature. That's how the practice will grow. Otherwise, you go on declaring, saying that there is no self. It's helping nobody. Right? So you have to understand the proper approach to this. It's a process. You have to continue with that process, improving yourself little by little. We say continual improvements, not continuous. You improve a little, you stay for a while, you see, and then again you improve a little more. Continual. That's how the practice works. Otherwise, you can simply declare saying that there is no self. But when something happens, all you are experiencing is a self. The suffering is real. The pain is real. So how can you deny that there is no self? Right? So that's the very idea. Today's topic, it's a bit deep one for sure, but it is important that we understand the whole teaching regarding the questions. Instead of simply answering questions, the Buddha encourages us to bring more awareness towards the questions instead of the answers. That's it for today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bante. A very deep topic. Sure most of us benefited on the types of questions. I suppose we could use these types of questions for every day as well, and the direct analytical and counter questions, and the questions that we should be setting aside. So we will discuss more in detail next week as well. So I hope all of you will come to next week's session for that. So next on the agenda is the reports that we have received from everyone, and we will then present them to Bante for his feedback. I now invite Chamari to take over this section. Chamari, we can't hear you on mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so for the Q&A, before I just go on to the reports, just for anyone who is listening to this talk via the recording, for the benefit of that, just mentioning how to start the mindfulness practice. There are two short videos that were provided by Nissarana, one for mindful walking, one for mindful sitting. Really easy to watch, just 2 or 3 minutes. So with maybe 5 minutes to start with for each of the practice, you can actually do the walking. If you have a strip of maybe 15 feet long, just to walk up and down and see what you notice in that walking process, anything you notice, whether the mind is able to stay with the feet movement, how the feet touches the ground, anything else that comes in as thoughts or sounds. You just start with 5 minutes and extend it to maybe 10, 15, and the expectation is we would have 1 hour each of mindful walking and mindful sitting, so 2 hours in total. So for the sitting as well, you would be just checking how the body is at the beginning, when the breath arises, whether you notice whether it's prominent or subtle. It might be the belly movements, just anything that you notice about the sitting practice as well, starting from 5 minutes, increasing over a period of time. And the best thing you can do afterwards is to write down your experience as a reflection report, because when you send it to Nissarana, this program, via a Google form or email, beginnersenvy@gmail.com, Abante will actually give valuable feedback, which will help you with your practice immensely. And also the recordings of all of the sessions so far will be also in the, I think it's in the chat as well as on the screen. You can pick it up on the Nissarana website and listen to them in your own time. So I will move on to the reports received for today. There were 3 sent, but I think the first one, Sonali, was read out by Anupama last week. So I'll just move on to the first one for today. At Teruvan Saranai Bante. From time to time, some things keep fading away. That happens at some distance, and it is blurred within brackets, like covered from fog. Still somewhat clear. Although reasons for this can be seen, there is no urge to dig as usual, as that reasoning out also fades away, but mostly based on disappointments with the incidents that happened. It urges only to face whatever fades face to face. So it continues accepting them as they are. So the power of those keep reducing gradually. It slowly happens. Teruvan Saranai Bante. That's the end of the report, Bante. That's from an adult.
Okay, now in your observation, you can see that these majority of the things are blurred. They are in the background, more like probably we can say the flow of existence. So it's in the background. It doesn't come into, vivid detailed attention. They are simply flowing. Right? So you don't have to go chase after them. What you feel is in that state. It's the original existence. Even the breath changes. Initially, you observe a solid breath. Gradually, it changes, become more subtle, and one day turn into a vibration. Right? So that type of a vibration is more like the original shape of existence. Right? And from this, thoughts, sounds, sights, bodily feelings, they appear. Right? So this blurry nature is more like the fabric of existence. So that's the original nature of existence. And out of that, time to time, certain vivid, colorful things appear. Right? So your meditation is not to chase after those blurry things. If they are blurry, the work is done. You simply continue your observation, and time to time, various vivid, colorful things appear. You get to experience things in detail, and that's where your focus should be, or that's where your mindfulness should be. In the background, you can feel these blurry things coming and going, and they are not really impacting you. That's the very idea. In order for you to find real peace within, the world has to become blurry. If the world is colorful, vivid, that means you have a lot of attraction, attachment in your mind. Remember the past, think about past incidents. The things that you remember are the occasions with lot of attachment. If some bad incident happened, somebody came and hurt you, blamed you, then those things you remember them in vivid detail. Even some positive occasions, incidents in your life, you remember them in vivid details. So usually whatever that goes into our memory, there are things with high attachment. Whenever we are attached to a certain incident, that goes into our memory. That's how it works. Right? So in this practice, most of the time things become blurry. You feel like you are losing your memory. You feel like you are losing your mind. You spend a day, but at the end of the day, you can't recall much. You spend 1 hour of walking, and at the end of the walking, you don't have much to report. You spend 1 hour of sitting. At the end of that sitting, you don't have anything to report. You know that you were mindful. You know that you were there, but there is nothing to report. Right? So it feels like that 1 hour was wasted because I have nothing to report. But that's the best meditation you can have. For 1 hour, you were there, you were mindful, and no real attachment. For a whole day, you were there, you were working, dealing with people, but at the end of the day, no real attachment. Right? That's how the real peace will arise. So in order for you to experience more and more peace, the world has to become blurry. And you can't force it. It will happen naturally when the practice evolves. So what you can do is simply continue this observation, continue your mindfulness practice, and as a result, the world will become more and more blurry. That doesn't mean that you can't function. You will be able to function even better because your mind is not preoccupied with the past things. Instead, you are attentive, you have present moment awareness, situational awareness is there, and you'll be able to function even better. So that's the idea. Thank you for reporting or sharing.
Thank you, Bante. That's really useful feedback. Let me bring up the second report. Okay. Yeah, this one is a short one. Venerable Swamin Wahansa, mindful walking. Walked observing feet as left and right. Floor was cold and hard. Oh, there is more. Yeah. Further, could identify roughness of the floor. Thoughts appeared and disappeared. Heard beautiful singing of birds. Observed 9 footsteps in a length. Mindful sitting. Sat and observed posture as a statue. Belly movements were changing, sometimes long, sometimes short. Thoughts appeared, stayed, passed. Certain sounds caught mind. Teruvan Saranai Utum Swami Wahansa. That's the end of that report, Bante.
Yes, so you can simply continue with this observation. Now, at this level, we have to encourage you to simply continue your mindfulness despite its sitting, walking, or your daily activities. Right? You can't simply limit this to walking or sitting. Instead, whenever you are awake, you can simply be mindful, and that would be your practice. That's how the practice will grow. Otherwise, you do the sitting, you do the walking, that's good, but there ends your practice as well. That's not how you should approach it. Instead, try to maintain a certain level of mindfulness in your daily life. And when you figure out the proper balance of it, then it becomes much easier, and you can be mindful without much effort. You can function as usual and still maintain your awareness. That's how it is. Even these days, we have many yogis here due to the holidays. And one of them, they were saying, Bante, now I can observe without exhaustion. His effort was too much, so he was feeling exhaustion due to the practice, sometimes headaches, chest pains, things like that. But now he is able to observe it without, exerting too much effort. So you can see he is able to continue his natural rhythm and still maintain awareness. That's how the practice should work. Otherwise, many people, they put too much effort, they become exhausted with meditation due to that effort. That shouldn't be the case, and it shouldn't become a hindrance to your usual way of functioning. You can function as usual. You can walk, talk, eat as usual, and simply continue awareness. That's the idea. Try and see.
Thank you, Bante. That's the end of the reports received for this week. If this is the time, I think we've got 5 more minutes to go. If anybody wants to put their Zoom hand up and ask a question, or even drop the question into the chat. Yeah, maybe the talk, which was a really deep one, is very clear to everybody. It wasn't that clear to me. Bante, I think I will ask a question. It's the question. It's a statement. I think something that I noted when you were giving the talk. So usually, obviously, for a long period of time, I'm trying to learn and practice. And when people ask, even if it is my son, he'll ask something, I'm trying to give him the answer when it is a practice question. Not that he practices, but he understands, I think, in theory. And I now realize when you give the answer, it's either he'll ask another question, which then I need about 2 hours to explain because he's not done any practice. Just realize that the wisdom, it's like it adds, it collects drop by drop. If it is a pot of, I don't know, liquid, it's just drop at a time. And so by giving the answer, he's more confused. He's interested in learning the Dhamma, but I think just don't give the answer. That's what I actually picked up from this talk. Just kind of ask him to explain his own understanding so far, and then maybe just guide him with something very small. So I just wanted to share that because I realized I was confusing him more.
Yeah, that's not only to you, that's what happens to most people, because we talk a lot about Dhamma. So many teachings are out there. You go on even your YouTube, you can find many such channels explaining all those things. So we take most of these things as given. We already know them, right? But have we achieved or reached that level? That's the question, right? We are simply thinking, theorizing on those topics, and that's not helping. What is important is simply to put these teachings into action or into practice. That's how it can transform your life. Not just talking about them, instead you put them into action. So mindfulness is a good way to execute this, to put this into action, right? So although your son is not practicing, you can encourage him in certain ways to observe and report back. Some kind of a question, you can twist it into that type of an experiment, right? Then that way they have to go back, observe, continue their observation for some time, then again come back with certain feedback. That would be a great approach. I don't know what age he is, but usually the little ones, they can be convinced to do these type of experiments, right? So you encourage, you twist that question into an experiment, and you get them to practice for a week or so and come back. So probably the question, you already know the answer, but you don't directly give it. You twist the question and turn it towards themselves, getting them to do some kind of a practice with it, right? That would be a very nice way. Even the boy who was asking questions yesterday about his thoughts, his feelings, things like that, I didn't answer. I told him that you have to check what's happening. You have to see what are the different kinds of thoughts that you are getting. You have to see how these thoughts are colliding with each other, right? So that way you get them to practice, become more aware, become more conscious. And with that practice, they might come with some insightful ideas, experiences. Right? So your skill matters. You have to twist those occasions into some kind of a practical exercise experiment.
Thank you, Bhante. Yeah, he's old enough to practice. He's 24. So he is interested. So I'm hoping, you know, I can use that. What is it called? The
Him
some
here for a vacation, one month vacation.
We'll do, Bhante. He'll be back in one day.
That happens, yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Sonali, I think we've just gone over the time as well. I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chamari. Yes, we have moved over the time, so we will now proceed to end the session. Thank you to everyone who sent in reports as usual, and thank you to Chamari for that question. We will discuss this topic next week as well. And for now, on behalf of the organizers, I'd like to thank Venerable Humagamat Amakosila for his guidance as usual on this program. As well as the Chief Abbot of Nisaranavanaya, whose idea was to initiate this program, Venerable Bhante Udayirigama Dhammajiva Mahatero. May these merits help them in improving their own practice as well. Thank you to all the organizers who are maintaining and managing the program and working really hard every week. And thank you and much merits to everyone who participated today and listening via YouTube as well. And anyone wants to watch them, obviously they're on our link on that we have shared. And any questions, please do let us know. And as usual, we will meet next week at 1 p.m. At Sri Lankan time. I wish everyone a happy and mindful week ahead, and obviously the year is ending as well. So hope you have had a productive year, and in the new year to have more resolution to practice Dhamma as well. So we will all see you in the new year. I will end the program for everyone.